This is one of those situations, and unfortunately we've had too many of them, where there's been an apparent corruption of the public process, a process that we all own and you all own. And when I say there's been a corruption of that process, there seems to be, by the very sloppy initial DEIS that was submitted in October, as I review this and judge it, an analysis that those who are sponsoring this project could get away with anything. Because frankly, if you look at that DEIS, the October version, you could only conclude that they thought that they could submit anything and get approval. Now the planning board said no to that. But then in another month, remarkably, in a matter of a couple of weeks, a new DEIS was forwarded. Now, our analysts have not studied every part of that new DEIS, at least to my knowledge as of yet. That study is still ongoing. But it is clear from reading it, and the gentleman, Paul Rubin, who's our hydrologist and water expert, has submitted a lengthy affidavit to this effect, that the DEIS is radically deficient. It's so incomplete that under New York State law, it plainly should not have been accepted by the planning board, but again should have been rejected by the board. Why is it so incomplete? Because its content does not allow an analysis of either the available water supplies in this community, nor the demand which Legoland will impose on those supplies. And without that detailed analysis, at least by the applicant, there can be no real judgment or determination with regard to this proposal. The DEIS should be a much more complete document. Now we also have here today Stephen Gross, and Mr. Gross also provided us an affidavit, an expert planner as he is, which indicates that upon his review of this document, not only is it incomplete, but that there's intentional segmentation in the review, which is a no-no, long since determined to be a no-no under New York State law. In simple terms, what that means is if you have a project and you anticipate that that project will have different phases or stages, it's your obligation to analyze the impacts of those phases or stages initially, not in segments. That's what segmentation means. Segmentation is prohibited by the regulations of the Department of Environmental Conservation, which implement CC4HV. This is very well known. This is nothing new. And again, the failure to provide a more complete analysis is a fatal flaw which should have led the planning board not to accept the draft environmental impact statement. Rather, they accepted it, and in a great haste, want to have this public hearing on December 15th. We're going on the 14th to court with one purpose, and that purpose is to explain to the court why it should not be party to this kind of truncated, rushed process with a project of this kind of public significance. The court should not be party to it. This community should not be party to it. We deserve a full review. You know, it's kind of bizarre. Many of you know that most simple projects could languish before a planning board for several years, literally. And here we are with what appears to be a project with huge implications, social, economic, and otherwise, certainly environmental, for this community. And yet we have this rush to judgment. Now, we also, in our petition, speak about the Town of Goshen Board, because frankly, there's an integration. The same law firm happens to represent the planning board and the board. And these things seem to me to be clear. You have here significant changes to a comprehensive plan, and I hope the media will understand this in its entirety, because it's very, very important that the public get the full picture. In April of 2016, a developer came and wanted to build several hundred units of housing on part of this site. There was a discussion held at the town board, not the planning board, to determine whether the town board was interested in doing a rezoning which would enable that development. During that discussion, at least 3 of the town board members spoke explicitly about the lack of water in that area, about the traffic problems in the area, about the environmental sensitivities in the area, the very same area which is the Legoland area. This has been repeated and repeated. And the comprehensive plan and the town zoning ordinance are both consistent with the comments that those 3 members uttered that day in April. And nothing has changed in the last 7 months or 8 months. There's an utter inconsistency between the Legoland proposal and the studies which have been done in this town of what parcels in the town, what properties, what areas are environmentally fragile and need to be protected. And yet Legoland trammels all of that, and there's a rush to approve it. I think people in this community understand the kind of corruption which is going on. That corruption doesn't necessarily mean someone's getting money in their pocket. We don't know that. But what it does mean is that you have a company which comes to a community and wants to give Christmas presents to everybody. Giving Christmas presents to everyone has nothing to do with the validity of this plan on this location. You can give Christmas presents to the whole world. It doesn't make your proposal any better or any worse. It's a distraction, frankly. All of their public relations efforts are a distraction. They're intended to get people in this community not to focus on the need to preserve critical environmental values, which have been recognized. And that's what I want to emphasize. They have been recognized. We're not asking for any radical departures. Quite the contrary. We're asking for a recognition of what this community has already recognized and acknowledged, not only in the Master Comprehensive Plan, but in its zoning. So that takes us back to the town board. The town board passed that zoning, the town board passed that comprehensive plan, and the town board is the only body which can change those documents. The planning board cannot do that. And as such, when the town board is presented with zoning changes or changes to the comprehensive plan, it must be lead agency, in my view, and it must do a generic study, an environmental study, which assesses the potential changes, not just of Legoland, but of anyone else if Legoland leaves tomorrow who might come and take advantage of those changes. Other developers can come. What would they be proposing? What would be the impacts? And that's what has to be studied. It has not been studied. We wrote on August 23rd of 2016 to the town board explaining all of this. We haven't had the courtesy of a response in literally 3.5 months. So these are very serious issues because the public, as we all know, has diminished faith and trust in government. And when things like this go on and projects seem rushed and major corporate interests come to a community and seem to be able to push aside years of study, years of memorialized documents which reflect the spirit of that community, it's well that people are cynical about their government. So those leading the county wear buttons. They're enthusiasts for this project. Before the project has been studied, they know it's a good project. How do they know? That's why we're not here today to discuss the substance of it. It may end up to be a wonderful project. I doubt it, but it's possible. We keep an open mind, but let the studies be done. Let the studies be done and let people have time to review them and digest them when you're making such a radical change in a community. So those are the major points that we're making. There's a segmentation problem. There's a problem of the completeness of the draft environmental impact statement, which should have compelled the planning board to reject it. There's a problem with the town board considering local law changes in a comprehensive plan, major amendment to the comprehensive plan, which would radically change that part of Goshen without the requisite studies and review. I want to thank Mr. Gross and Mr. Rubin, two of our experts who worked assiduously in the past week to produce affidavits which are highly well-reasoned. We presented them to the court, and I thank you and recognize you for your work on that. Much appreciated, I'm sure, by everyone in the community. The only other thing I want to say is this. We do have a court date on the 14th. It is open to everyone in the community to come and hear the arguments. See and be seen. I think it's important that everyone understands that that's a last resort in a democracy. We don't go to court simply running to court. We're going to court because we feel that and some of you can speak to this directly, we feel that the vehicles of government have essentially been hijacked. And there really is no alternative if we're going to have a fair review early on to have those vehicles of government function. And in that regard, the major demand we are going to make, other than not proceeding on the 15th with a public hearing, is to move the planning board out of the process. I don't believe the planning board is an objective body. I think they've manifested that over and again. And I think the State Department of Environmental Conservation is the right entity to do a review of this magnitude. This involves not only Goshen, it involves neighboring communities, it involves traffic flow that's going to impact many communities, it involves resource issues that are going to involve many communities. The DEC is an appropriate body for the town of Goshen to ask to take over for this planning board. The idea that people are wined and dined, people go down to Florida, people see another site, all that, the coziness which is developed here does not give the public confidence that this review will be fair. The rush to judgment does not give that feeling. The scoping session, where for the first 40 minutes of the scoping session, we're sitting there with an infomercial blasting in our ears from Legoland. None of these are regular practices, and none of these would be done if there was a fairness to the process. And quite frankly, and more significantly, this planning board should never have even begun the review until that applicant had a zoning which allowed it to proceed. It does not have that. So those are some of the major points in our lawsuit. As I said earlier, and I want it to be very clear, we're not at the point where we're talking about the substantive, environmental, economic, social issues. We're talking about process. In order for those issues to be properly assessed, the process has to be a fair process. And to date, we don't believe it has been fair or legal. And that's why we've gone to court.